In Chatelet, buckos, and welcome to Polecat Cast number 125. Salon writer pushes against identity politics, or is it fake news? Where our stealthy polecats ferret out the best feels, funnies, and what the fucks to discuss Slam Bam Badger style. Mind your spines for the cringe, hold on for your sides for the lulls, and keep your chemo at the ready for this cancer. Today's Polecat panel consists of Max Darrett, Simpsons-kin, and Look at the stars, look how they shine for you.
Jesus Christ.
And everything you do.
Wait. Were they all yellow?
Yeah, they were all yellow.
Okay, good.
Polecat Punster and Pussycat Punisher Hannah, Dr. Ranimer Cam, Brighton, Panda, Puppet Master, and Rabid Long-Range Rhetorician, and me with my Globus Cruciger and Scepter in hand, the Supreme Doge in charge. Though today's topics might be frustrating for me, I will not be taking my ball and going home today. Today we'll be discussing the following topics. In the UK, it would appear that school uniforms for children aren't like the ones you might know from Harry Potter, as hijabs are currently being added to school uniform policies in 17,000 primary schools nationwide. House Slytherin? More like House Muhammad, am I right? Penn State has received $300,000 from the NSF to develop technology that will once and for all tell us the difference between real news and fake news. Good thing, too, because I was getting tired of thinking for myself. Salon.com has always been the font of progressivism and anti-bigotry, as well as tolerance, thanks to its dedication to the highest level of political discourse that exists, that being identity politics. But wait! One of their writers has written an article expressing lamentation for that most intellectually robust of arguments. Before we dox him and take his job from him in the name of tolerance, let's see what this bigot wrote. The American College of Pediatrics has just gotten back to us with something that we already knew. Gender ideology and socialization is harmful to children, so leave them the fuck alone, please. A study from the university professors finds that the majority of students have not experienced discrimination, even with the ever-broadening definition of discrimination being what it is. And finally, our bonus story for the patron-only after show. So, something terrible happened last week. Danielle Bregoli, also known as Cash Me Outside Girl, recently released a music single? Something with noise in it, and I guess people dance to it or something. Anyway, I'm sure it's just awful, but she is a product of our culture. Or is she? Michael Harriot of SJW website The Root has written a piece on Danielle's new music video titled "One of the Worst Things White People Ever Did to Black People Happened This Week," comparing Danielle's video to the Jim Crow South as well as the institution of slavery. While I'm sure Danielle's music is going to make me want to shoot myself in the balls with a rivet gun, I will really need to see what the article is about before I make a final judgment on comparing it with literally chattel slavery. Anyway, if you guys would like to participate in our after shows as either an audience member or a participant, please consider becoming a patron at www.patreon.com/honeybadgerradio. Now, before I hand this off to Max to give us the first story, there's something I would like to announce. The first men's center in Ottawa will celebrate a grand opening this Saturday, September the 9th. The grand opening of the Canadian Centre for Men and Families of Ottawa, the first men's center in the nation's capital, will take place this Saturday, September 9th at 1 p.m. at 292 Montreal Road, Suite 302. The landmark event follows the conclusion of a successful fundraising campaign that raised over $80,000 from hundreds of contributors across the country. Quote, "We are so thankful to our donors and so proud of the amazing team of dedicated volunteers who have come together and opened a center to close critical gaps in programs and services for boys and men in Ottawa," said David Shackleton, Ottawa Director of the Canadian Association for Equality, the charity that governs the CCMF. CCMF Ottawa joins its Toronto sister agency as the second men's health and social service hub in Canada, marking CAFE as the first national organization to operate multiple men's centers. The grand opening will feature keynote speeches a ribbon-cutting ceremony, and an opportunity to meet the staff and volunteers leading the initiative, including founding executive director Patrick Wright. Wright holds a master's degree in health promotion from Dalhousie University, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, where he served as a director of health professions for the Dalhousie Association of Graduate Students. Establishing a center dedicated to providing social services targeted towards men is an important step towards improving the health and well-being of men and families, said Wright. We're excited to start working with other organizations to help meet the needs of the Ottawa community. CCMF Ottawa has already unveiled its initial programs, including a fathering after separation or divorce peer support group and employment support and resources. Media will have an opportunity to interview agency leaders during the grand opening. Okay, so now that that is out of the way, I would like to hand the mic, the floor, the panel, the soapbox over to Max.
Yes. Oh, yes. Ladies and gentlemen, let's do this shit, okay? But before we start, I just want to say something that should be obvious to you. You probably already know this. For you, I bleed myself dry.
Oh,
for you, I bleed myself dry. Oh, what?
That was something I forgot to mention. The reason why I played that song in the beginning, which I know you guys that are here, that are in with me, couldn't hear, is because today is Edward Keel's birthday. Edward Keel is the man who is known for singing what people call the Troll-a-Lol song. So it was his birthday today. I played his song in honor of Edward Keel, who basically gave us a meme that will probably never die. So, and the fact that I had a birthday yesterday, and I'm only 24 hours away from Edward Keel, I think it's not a coincidence, guys. It's not a coincidence. If I could put that in echoes, I would. Okay, Max, it's all you.
Oh, dear. Okay, so let's go, chillins. A hijab is an Islamic garment, we all know this, commonly worn by Muslim women. It is generally understood to be worn by women after they hit puberty and to discourage sexual advances from other men. While that may disgust some of us, like myself, that under Islam, women are responsible for the sexual actions of men, but what is more disgusting than that is the fact that some primary schools in the Western world are letting children as young as 6 wear them. In the United Kingdom, a survey was carried out by the Sunday Times in order to determine how many primary schools in England include the hijab as part of their uniform policy. After examining 800 primary schools, they found 18% of them include the hijab and the uniform policy. For England, which has over 17,000 primary schools nationwide, the total figure is likely in the thousands. And just to correct something that Brian said while introing the show, it's not 17,000 schools that are including this. It's just that there's 17,000 schools throughout the UK, and over 1,000 of them would probably be including this part.
Oh, whoops, my bad.
Part of their, yeah, it's okay, Doc. Now, before you start to despair about the lengths human beings will go in order to avoid the label of racist, let me introduce you to a few awesome women fighting against these policies. A Muslim feminist campaigner named Aisha Ali Khan has spoken out about the rising trend of children wearing this garment. While speaking to Mail Online, she said the following, quote, "The hijab should be banned from primary schools, but local authorities are afraid of causing offense to the Muslim community and afraid of being branded as racist." No. How can a 4 or 5-year-old child make an informed choice? It's not allowed in Islam, so why is it being allowed in schools? Good question. Another woman, a children's right campaigner named Gina Khan, no relation, added the following. Schools are allowing it because they are afraid of being called Islamophobic, and they've been told that this is a religious garment, but they need to support Muslim girls to have free choices, not to be set apart from other children. That's me doing a slow clap. Okay. Other notable Muslim feminists have commented on the issue, including Shaista Gohir of the Muslim Women's Network. Quote, "We challenge parents who spray tan or give pole dancing classes to 7-year-olds, so we should be challenging Muslim parents who make young children wear the hijab." I don't know what part of the country she's living in where that's something that comes up a lot, 7-year-olds doing pole dancing classes, but in my opinion, I think it's wonderful to see women who follow Islam speaking out against this type of sexist subjugation. But the ultimate question, and the question I want to pose to my fellow panelists and to the people watching the stream, is whether or not their efforts are enough. Discuss.
Well, before we go on, I want to point out something about the hijab. Feminists do say that the hijab exists to make women responsible for men's behavior. I don't see it that way. I see it as a way to smear all men with the behavior of some, and it exists as the claim we have to hide under this so that men don't look at us, okay, stare rape or whatever. And it's the same thing as the burqa and all of the other aspects of various cultures, not just Islam, but various cultures that have involved women having to wear and these huge amounts of clothes, cover from head to toe. And in history, we've had these strict rules what women should cover up in the past as well. And men had to cover up too. In the early 20th century, men had to fight to go shirtless at the beach. Men's nipples were sexualized, to use a feminist term. So this idea to me of this being a thing that is done to women and only to women, and girls and only girls, as opposed to both sexes, I don't buy it. It's a demonizing to men thing to say that men are such animals and so out of control that women have to hide under layers and layers of fabric in order to prevent themselves from being ogled or molested or whatever. It's bullshit. And I know that people are going to take that as Islam apology, but I don't care what culture makes the stipulation that women have to cover up because men are bad. They're still saying men are bad. So that's my little spiel. Go on from there.
Well, the only thing I guess I would add is I'm taking a little bit of issue with this quote, and I know that it's going to come across as nitpicking, so forgive me if that's what it is. But she says, we challenge parents who, the woman's Shaista Gohir says, we challenge parents who spray tan or give pole dancing classes to 7-year-olds, so we should be challenging Muslim parents who make young children wear the hijab. I think that if you're going, you can make a strong argument against essentially enforcing children to wear the hijab without making this kind of ridiculous comparison to something that most parents don't do, which is spray tan their kids and give them pole dancing lessons. That happens, but that's a very small percentage of really trashy and shitty parents that are basically enforcing that on their kids, much like the kinds of kids or the kinds of parents that might enforce their kids or push on their kids things like the gender spectrum. Maybe that they're trying to raise them in a gender neutral way. That happens, but it's extremely small. So what you really got to address, and I'm making this point because I think the methodology and the way that you approach making counter arguments to stuff, it has to be really good. You have to make a really good case for it. And I think comparing it to like spray tanning and pole dancing classes is not the strongest way to do it. So you got to make the case against the hijab in a way that focuses on the child's freedoms and also what might be best for them in that environment. Now, if you make it mandatory for, I guess my only question with this is, if you make it mandatory for kids to wear the hijab in school, are you only making it mandatory for Muslim kids to wear the hijab in school? So if you're only, why would you even need to do that at that level when the parents would be doing it at home anyway? And that, because like when I don't know, like when I was going to school, I had Muslim classmates that wore. I
don't think that's what's happening.
Okay.
I think it's not. She's not upset because they're making, like, the school's not making the kids wear that. It's included in the, what school uniform policies usually do is they have a list of things. These are the acceptable things you can wear. This type of shirt, this type of jacket, this type of pants, this type of skirts.
So you're saying it's on a list of allowable things, but it's not a thing that you have to wear, right?
And this is why she's comparing it to pole dancing rather than, like, if it was a religious conservative thing, they'd be comparing it to there are churches that do not permit the youth to wear makeup or to dance or to wear more modern clothes, or there's all kinds of different religious groups that have different restrictions that are placed on their adherents, the people that practice that religion. And this would be more along those lines. But she's comparing it to pole dancing because she's accusing the schools, by placing that on the list, of sexualizing the children that are wearing these hijabs on the basis of the reason for it being worn is to protect women from having their hair over.
Right. So it doesn't even make sense to, what you're saying is that the purpose of the hijab wouldn't actually make sense in the context of like a 6-year-old girl that basically shares a classroom with a bunch of 6-year-old boys who most of which don't understand, most of which they have no concept of sexuality, sexual desire, anything outside of like little kid puppy love, which is totally and completely innocent. And
it'd be like those people that complain about parents that let their 1-year-old toddle around on the beach in just a swim diaper, as opposed to having a top on if the 1-year-old happens to be a girl. And it has nothing to do with sunburn. It's all, well, that's a girl, she should have a shirt on. And, a 1-year-old doesn't have any reason to put on a shirt.
In the article, it actually specifically says that the hijab is usually only worn by young girls after puberty.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it's not even something that little girls would wear. So then, if they're putting that on the list, could it be because it's sort of like a broad uniforms that applies for kids as young, like they're not breaking it down for kids that are like entering middle school, say like a girl, she's 11 or 12 and she hits puberty early, or actually that's around the time that they normally hit it, but like when they get to about 12 they start to develop, or 11, sometimes as early as 9 it could happen. Yeah, so when that happens, then the rules are already in place for in case of it. So maybe it's just a matter of how how these sort of terms or these rules are laid out.
It could be they have the same list from elementary school all the way up through high school for these schools that have uniforms. But that would have to be something, you'd have to look into it to find out. I guess the thing that really struck me about this story, though, was the fact that for this feminist, it was about the hijab sexualizing the girls, as opposed to this is an unnecessary restriction in her mind. And I think this goes back to the way feminists have looked at Islam consistently. This goes back to demonizing men again, demonizing boys, that these girls supposedly have to wear this stuff again to protect them from being ogled and to protect them from being treated with a lack of respect because their hair is naked.
Look, okay, so where do I even start with this? It's like you read a story like this and you start to ask yourself, how far are people going to go to allow this type of religious doctrine to go forward? Because it's pretty obvious if you look at this from purely logical standpoint how easy it is to understand this entire situation. The reason why people, young women, wear this garment is because they want to discourage male attention or sexual advances. Okay, and considering that fact, and considering the fact that that requirement isn't apparently a part of the religion of Islam, at least according to Aisha Ali Khan, why the hell are we getting children to wear this sort of thing? I don't understand. And what pisses me off the most is exactly what Hannah said. It's the fact that we're not just the fact that we're reinforcing the fact that women are responsible for men's sexual behavior within the religion of Islam, but also the fact that it reinforces the fact that men are pigs that desire sex all the time, especially in this case of children, which is disgusting. I don't see why. Okay, look, we have to start at some point having an honest conversation about what is part of Islam, what isn't a part of Islam, and what can we discourage when it comes to people that follow the religion of Islam and how they try to adapt into Western culture. Because look, they can come over here and they should realize that, look, here in this part of the world, we men understand that unless you have some boundaries of consent, or like some boundaries of consent established, they can't make sexual advances towards women, regardless of what they're wearing. They can't do it. So you're in a much safer place here, so that you don't have to dress like that.
Maybe, no, there's a joke there, but I'm not going to tell it. Actually,
Go ahead.
I should. Okay.
Safe spaces.
No, I was just going to say, maybe if Aisha had a hijab, we wouldn't be in this mess. But,
Jesus Christ. I was waiting for somebody to go there.
That sounded like a she-jab.
A she-jab. It sounded like a she-jab.
Well, I don't know. I mean, this is not. It's. What I guess I'm still like kind of lost on. Okay, the idea that a school is. I think what they're trying to do is appear tolerant. So they're basically just. I think that's what they're doing. So they're changing their uniform rules to include people of the Muslim faith in it, and people might be reading into it too much in terms of the school's intentions. But I have to wonder, because there are also multiple campaigns that you see, like lots of propaganda campaigns that push the hijab not only as a tool of Islam, but also as a tool of liberation for all women. You can find lots. You can find that everywhere, though. And feminists are some of the ones that are the biggest ones behind that. So, you know,
well, yeah, because they like that whole
accident.
demonization factor. They can use that to demonize men, and they can use demonization of men to claim a need for more female power and a need for more funding for feminist-led initiatives. So they love stuff like this. But I think part of what's going on here, there's three kind of distinct major factors involved in stuff like this in Europe. There's two very distinct separate groups coming in through the refugee pathways. There are people who are actual refugees from war-torn areas that just want to get away from the fighting and the actual oppression that they're facing at the hands of more specific or stricter or more controlling factions within the religion, and they just want to go be Muslim in a place where they can be free and not get killed for being Muslim differently than these other people think they should be Muslim. Then there are people who are coming in who are criminals, and they're coming in. They're parts of gangs. They're parts of the actual factions that these other people are running away from. There are some coming in who are simply looking to exploit the situation, and that other whole group, that mess of criminals coming in, are engaging in violence, and they're pushing to sort of make their belief system the dominant belief system in the areas that they live in, and there's efforts to make them dominant in the nations where they're living, where they're moving to. And then you've got feminists who see the potential to exploit this situation to increase their power and their control. And of course, they're looking at the aspects of Islam that demonize particularly the common man, but men in general, as sex-hungry animals that can't control themselves, and people in general as being unable to make their own decisions for themselves. Because this is like a lot of different religions where you have the clergy who tells you what to do, and you're not smart enough to figure that out yourself. You're not smart enough to figure the religious texts out for yourself. You have to listen to the clergy and follow their rules, and there's religious law, and there are religious penalties for breaking the religious laws and so on. That's perfect for feminism because it's a very controlling, very, very authoritarian system. And it's fine for people to follow that on their own by choice in a way that they feel is beneficial to their lives. But it's not fine when a conduit between religion and government, like feminism, takes hold of it and starts translating it into aspects of activism that inform law and policy. And that's what we're seeing now. And you got feminists, you got Western feminists, and you got Muslim feminists, and there are a few shades of difference in their behaviors and attitudes. But the one thing that I'm seeing in common between both groups that's really, really solid in common between both groups. Yes, demonization of men. That idea that men are uniquely incapable of controlling their baser instincts. Now, they also, both groups will treat women as infants, as children, who are also, we supposedly need people to control our decision-making process too, according to both types of feminists. But men are worse, according to both types of feminists, and that's a consistent thing. And I can support the idea of having these schools listen in terms of, this is what is traditional, this is not what is traditional, this would be considered going way overboard to have these young kids wear this hijab. But I do find it disturbing that the argument against the hijab is about sexualization rather than this is just not something they have to do yet.
Fucking kids.
Yeah, I think my last thought on this is, because I had to think about this a little bit to see where the problem is, and I'm split mainly because this is a question of, like, I'm going to treat it like a question of religious freedom versus, applying some kind of policy. So where I stand on it is, ultimately, if the schools are essentially allowing people to wear the hijab, and they're basically saying, look, if you want to wear it, we're going to include it as part of the uniform so that we aren't telling kids to take it off because your parents might make you wear it, then I guess I'm okay with that. Now, if you want to criticize the hijab, if you want to criticize 6-year-olds wearing the hijab, I don't think your criticism was with the school. I think your criticism is with Islam. And I think that's where it should go. And I think that these Muslim feminists should direct their energy at Islam and not at the schools. Because while I agree that what the school is doing could be considered overly PC, I think that they're playing it safe, and I don't think that's ultimately the problem. I think the ultimate problem is that Islam has that as a rule at all, and the fact that they could apply it to 6-year-olds. But then comes down to the parents' choice too. So I think that it's likely, and I think we would need more data to know for sure. I'd like to know, of all of the Muslim students that go to school in the UK, how many of the ones that are underage are expected by their parents or their community to wear the hijab to school or in public, and how many of them are okay with basically waiting until they hit puberty before they put it on. Essentially, how hardcore are we talking here when it comes to the population of Muslims in the UK in terms of their dedication to essentially expecting their kids to wear the headscarf? And I think that, and ultimately, what that will come down to is who. So if it comes down to the parents are making their kids do it, then if we want to talk about what's wrong with it, we talk with them. Because I don't think I think the school is basically just trying to. The schools are just trying to not get into any problems. And I bet that the ones that are actually starting to include that are probably schools that are in districts that they have a large Muslim population, so they kind of have to. I'm
they
guessing.
Might be in a more conservative, an area where there's a more conservative Muslim population than others, or, it's odd if this is, as this woman basically is explaining, one of the trappings of adulthood. One of the things that it'd be like sending your daughter to school at 6 years old or 7 years old in high-heeled shoes as opposed to sneakers.
Yeah.
Or, stuff like that.
But
and I can, I can see why she might want to start a conversation about that.
Sure.
But at the same time, it is it may be different in the UK, very, very different in the UK than it is here in the US, but it strikes me that it's a religious freedom issue. There's also, you got two different groups within the same religious outlook with two different stories on what should be done here. Obviously, the schools wouldn't have come up with this idea, and there would not be 6-year-olds going to school with a hijab on unless there were parents that as part of their religious practice were sending them to school dressed that way.
I would also.
I doubt that they're not I doubt they're non-Muslim parents. So you've got two different groups of Muslims, and one of them is saying, this is our tradition, and the other one is saying, that's not Muslim tradition. Who do you listen to?
Mm-hmm. I'd also throw in too that if it was other religions, like and I guess it just comes down to whether it's a freedom you're allowing for or one you're trying to resist against. So if you're basically saying you can wear the hijab if you want to, and I'm going to say that that's okay as a uniform choice, and then they choose to do that, I may not agree with the reasons. I think that there's lots of reasons to fight against that and resist it and make arguments against it and all that. But I'm not going to point fingers at the school and say you guys shouldn't do that. I think that they're doing what they can to accommodate the population that's there, especially if the schools are state funded, which I don't know if they are, but I'm guessing that in the UK, as many Western countries, there's probably a large number of publicly funded schools, which means they kind of have to accommodate their constituents, right? So if it was a Christian, and let's say they were like Jehovah Witnesses or something, like they were kind of hardcore, I had Jehovah Witnesses come visit me today, and I was just sort of thinking about how hardcore Jehovah Witnesses are. But anyway, they have a certain way of doing things in terms of their beliefs, things they don't eat, things they don't ever do, things that, like, they have a long list of rules. And if there was a Jehovah Witness that went to school, let's say that there were certain things that they wanted to wear in their uniform that weren't on the list. Well, I think that if there was enough of a Jehovah Witness population, although I don't even know that Jehovah Witnesses go to public school, they probably I don't know. But they might have to, I think that accommodating that in terms of allowing them to express their religion in the way that is most comfortable for them while also being able to attend school, I'm okay with. Of course, I'm going to criticize Jehovah Witnesses for some of the ways they do things that I may not agree with, or I might at least say, well, you guys are not allowed to eat chocolate? What the fuck? Because they can't. But I think that's different from trying to sort of impose something on them. So I guess that's kind of where I sit with this as well. I don't like that they're making little girls wear the hijab, but they're going to do it anyway, right? I mean, they're going to do it in public or somewhere else.
Just one quick thing before we move on to the one quick thing off topic. I just wanted to say, in respect to the Jehovah Witnesses, I actually had a couple Jehovah Witnesses come to my door the other day, and I was really cordial to them. And when I asked if they were Jehovah Witnesses, they said yes. I was like, "Oh, I'm actually a part of a subcategory of your religion." Like, what do you mean? I was like, "Well, have you ever heard of the Jehovah Witness Protection Program?" And they're like, "No, what is that?" And I said, "Well, it's like, that's a whole other story." But anyways, let your mind go with that however you wish. But anyways, just like my own personal perspective on this whole issue, if I were a UK teacher and I saw these kids wearing Islamic garment to sort of discourage the sexual advances of adult men, I would be raising shit about it. I wouldn't care about I wouldn't care about the security of my job. I would make a huge fuss about it. If somebody called me Islamophobic, I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry that I find it kind of fucked up that you expect 6-year-old young girls to take it upon themselves to discourage the sexual advances of adult men." I don't really think that's particularly, what's the word, kosher for my culture.
Yeah.
Poor choice of words.
If you're a male teacher, I really wouldn't recommend this if you're a male teacher, because that's a quick way to get called a paedophile.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at the possibilities of what's likely to happen. Let one of your female friends do it.
There you go.
Oh, no, trust me. Just yeah, you're right. You're right, Mike. Thankfully, I tend to get along with women, so. But I don't play. What the hell am I talking about?
Well, you just make a comparison. You just make a comparison. Okay, so you're telling me they got to wear this to discourage the sexual interest of adult men. Are you going to also make them wear, or come to school with stainless steel umbrellas to protect them from acid bombs falling from the sky? Because that could happen just as easily. That's just as likely. They're just as likely to run into that. So while you're at it, they need to have somebody in front of them with a big shield to make sure that no spaceships come up out of the ground and run them over, because that's just as likely. That's just as likely to happen as well. So
all those things happen in the Quran. Just in case you guys are
all of those things are definitely. It's important for these school kids to be. While you're at it, don't make sure none of the unicorns in the woods near the school come and take the little girls away, because they're in serious danger. So yeah, statistically, no, they're this is kind of ridiculous.
Yeah,
But and it's worth pointing that out as well.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, like, again, make the case against Islam.
Okay, Michael Keller, that's the point!
Yeah, that's the point.
Sorry.
What? Okay. So, let's go on to the next story, then. All right. Building a better bullshit detector. Penn State professor of technology Dong-Won Lee... Sorry. And professor of communication...
Really?
I just Dong-Won. It sounds like a porn name that's got a little Don Juan in it, but it's like a Chinese porn star, like libertine type. Okay, anyway.
Brian, what's your first name?
My Dong? Wait, Brian?
No, Long.
Long.
Oh, Long. Okay.
What's your last name?
Dong.
Dong.
What's your middle name?
Duck.
Sorry, continue. I had to.
Okay.
Close enough.
Penn State professor of technology Dong-Won Lee and professor of communications S. Shyam Sundar have received $300,000 from the National Science Foundation to create technology to help computers and smartphones determine what is and isn't fake news. Lee believes that fake news is nothing new, but the advent of the internet and social media have exacerbated the problem. The two professors believe that through tackling the characteristic indicators of fake news, they can develop formulas and other algorithmic devices to enable digital devices to recognize and purge stories that contain them.
Yeah, okay. Because like YouTube can't even determine whether or not whether something is advertiser friendly when all we're talking about is fucking cats. But you guys expect to be able to weed out a bunch of different stories on their content just by selecting out problem words? Give me a break. I don't understand how they can possibly construct something like this.
They are. I don't think they can. The only thing that this could possibly result in, if they do anything, is what we already have, which is basically a popular search engine that tells you the news it wants you to know. I mean,
yeah, that's going to be more likely.
Yeah, like
it'll be something that deems everything from a political perspective disapproved by the creator fake news.
Yep. So $300,000 well spent, grant givers or whatever. Who gave them this money too? National Science Foundation. So
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. So the NSF. Yeah, that's right. So okay. So we have two Penn State professors. I might have to look up Penn State to find out where their politics are, but I have an inkling. I know where it is, and they're deeply involved in science. Well, no, because I think I know where Penn State stands as a university, on top of the fact that these guys are getting involved with tech, and you could see the tech giants are pretty ideological. Like the tech giants like Google and Apple and Facebook and all that. So
say it ain't so, Brian.
I know, it's crazy. It's almost like and the thing is, what I would like to see is some. First off, I don't think that there should be algorithms trying to remove fake news. I think all of it should stay up, and then people should be able to decide for themselves whether or not something is real or not. Because as soon as you give somebody the power to essentially control the flow of information, I don't care who they are. I don't care if they're Jesus. I don't think Jesus Christ is that moral that he's going to know what people need to know that's not fake and what is. There's nobody that can do that. So the idea that could be done is highly illogical, and is no way it's going to happen. So I'm for the idea of essentially a free flow of information with people constantly checking each other, which I'm okay with, even if they're full of shit while they do it, because then you just get, somebody in the comments section said Jesus is biased as fuck. Yeah. Well, yeah, I bet that's what I'm saying. He would be biased, though, wouldn't he?
The organization that he belongs to is rife with nepotism. So
Yeah, exactly.
Like, I mean, what do you expect?
So there's, I mean, he loves
the guy rides donkeys into town.
That's right. I mean, if he loves everyone, how can you possibly be objective? But seriously though, there's no way that could even be manageable. And when anybody who tells you they can do something as impossible as essentially deciding the truth, what the truth is, and they can interpret it and send it to you, they're lying to you. There's just no way that that's doable. So this is a waste of money.
They've really gone from defining fake news as like news that is entirely made up to reports that either actually state or infer a conclusion with which they disagree. And like the first is obviously, yeah, that would be fake news. And most of the time you can tell by looking at the site's about page for the disclaimer that says this is a parody site. And then you figure out
how am I going to find going to find Onion articles if they're blocking them out. I like reading those. Sometimes the Onion gets it more right than the actual fucking mainstream media does.
Yeah, sometimes they do. But I mean, now they're turning around and saying, well, if you present a set of solid facts that are absolutely true, but you present them in a way that leads to a conclusion that I disagree with, you're fake news. And that's bullshit. And it's like it's equating well, and then of course there's news organizations that'll make assertions and not present any facts. And those are obviously, that can be fake, but equating parody with I don't like your conclusion, therefore it's fake is absolutely irresponsible. In terms of organizations like this is something that can go in any direction. It can be used to manipulate public opinion in ways that are very dangerous. It can be used to keep people from having information that is incredibly useful to them and beneficial in their lives. It can be used to keep people ignorant of things they need to know in order to have control over their own lives and in order to make decisions when it comes time to vote for who's going to be the next government. So like this idea that there should not be, even if they could do it, even if they could come up with an algorithm that absolutely 100% could tell you if news was parody or not, and if there were no sources or not, things like that. No entity or organization should be trusted to make that decision for the reader. That really should be up to the reader, simply because it takes away the reader's ability to seek out information that is useful to them.
Yep. Someone said, random name said a comment. I think this is important. This is the Jesus issue that I brought up. I feel remiss that I used him as an example because this is not bad. He says, technically Jesus should be able to do that because if I'm correct on the whole religious stuff, he is God and God is omniscient. So God would know what the fake news is.
Okay, dude, listen. Do you honestly trust a guy who says, suffer little children to come on to me?
Oh.
Well,
seriously. I don't care if he's all
you don't know. There was no deodorant. Maybe they did suffer.
Okay, so maybe Jesus would do a decent job, but I'd still rather that he's part of a team along with like Buddha and Moses, and like Odin, and that's it.
Allah.
Yeah. No. I think Allah's got like special interest in maybe painting a narrative, but the other guys are fine, especially the old dead ones like the Egyptians, because they're not going to get anything out of it. Like Ra doesn't hope to gain much, but they can see everything. Yeah, but so
we should make sure Ra checks all the sports news.
Right.
I totally trust him. He's the best.
We can pair him with the ancient deities Sis, Boom, and Ba.
That's right.
And my personal favorite, Yu-Gi-Oh! Oh wait.
Oh God.
What? Okay, so I think we've officially killed the topic.
No. One last thing, okay? Everybody say it with me. Kojima was right.
Yes.
That's all.
This is people trying to control information, and this is not the first time we've actually talked about, college professors getting grants to try to create fake news detectors, and they're gonna keep trying to do it. They're gonna continue to do it. So we have to call them on it because such a task should not happen. If you don't, you want North Korea, because that's how you get North Korea.
Well, if they can fund it themselves. If some private organization wants to fund that, that's their business. They shouldn't get money from the government for it. The government shouldn't be funding that kind of thing. The government already funds too many things that are really not the business of the government to control or deal with. But I don't think we should be stopping people from creating things. I think we should be basically looking at, is this something that should be under government jurisdiction, and is this something that the government should be subjected to? And the answer there is no.
Absolutely not. Or the mainstream media, even if they supposedly aren't part of the government, they should certainly not be involved. That's why I would worry that if somebody somehow created an algorithm that actually worked shortly after he does it, or she, in the case that a woman does it, the mainstream media and government officials and lots of other interested parties are going to immediately try to get their hands on that, because that is controlling what people know. And that is extremely powerful, especially in this digital age of instant information. So it's something that has to be handled responsibly. And I'm extremely skeptical that anyone knows, what they're doing when they say, "Oh yeah, I can tell you guys what the truth is with a simple computer program." No, fuck off. There's no way. All right, so moving on to the next story.
I would go so far as to say that it would be worthy of legislation saying that the government cannot use a system like that or any other system to start giving people advice or making rules about who can watch what, who can read what, who can see what.
All right, so next story. Salon lets one slip through the cracks. The left's tactic of labeling anyone who disagrees with their agenda as a bigot has grown ever more tiresome over the past couple of years. After Trump won the election, I thought they may gain an ounce of self-awareness instead of labeling approximately half the U.S. population racist, sexist, xenophobic, homophobic, etc. Imagine my shock. Envision my surprise when it was the apparent rise of the alt-right's use of identity politics that may actually inspire some internal reflection. Salon, yes, you heard me correctly, Salon.com has given us an article entitled, "It's Time to Give Up on Identity Politics, It's Dragging the Progressive Agenda Down." The author of this article, Anis Shivani, has never bought into identity politics and warns, rather cynically, of the mess that we are in. Identity politics seeks to maximize emotionalism and minimize rationality, privileging culture over politics and economics where the real consequences occur. Shivani points out that the longing of liberals to cure racism at the metaphysical level, which is, i.e., in people's hearts, instead of limiting politics to the area of democratic policy making, elites have been given an obstructed opportunity to redefine economics to benefit themselves. To elaborate on how identity has been prioritized over politics, he asked to consider the last election. Quote, "The contest became mostly about Hillary Clinton's personality, she's a woman, therefore I must be with her, versus Donald Trump's personality, he must be a misogynist, therefore I must oppose him," end quote. Shivani sees identity politics as a non-winnable game that never ends, always breeding an equal and opposite reaction, calling identity politics the mother of white nationalism. Shivani identifies that Richard Spencer's discussions of race as destiny are, quote, "no different than liberals who have been articulating every aspect of identity split into narrower and narrower niches," end quote. Because the left has determined, quote, "all identities are equally sacrosanct," and that, quote, "we must not critique our other cultures from an Enlightenment perspective," end quote, by the same logic, even white nationalists should be given a "to each his own and race's destiny" pass. Because we're exercising the same logic towards the white nationalist party, right? Shivani ends his article very pessimistically, comparing the situation to the indoctrination in Soviet Russia in the 1930s, where only an economic catastrophe that lays waste to everything can change anything. However, this article, published on Salon of all places, gives me hope that people will come to realize something else Shivani said. Quote, "We cannot be readers and interpreters of people's hearts and minds. Such a venture has no business in politics."
So, Salon, it's only when the Nazis come out in Charlottesville that you decide to post an article like this, huh? Well, I gotta give you props.
Yeah.
Good for you. Good for you.
Although, if you guys weren't doing this shit, we probably wouldn't be in this mess. So it's partly their fault, I think.
Oh, yeah.
I said this when Gamergate had basically come and gone, and we started to approach the election was coming close, and I saw social justice warriors doing what they always do, which is double down, project all the time, demonize as many people as possible, and the media gleefully getting involved with that, whether it was for profit motive or to ideological motive, which I think it's probably a mix of both of those things. I said, if these guys keep this shit up, they are going to create a response on the other side that they're not going to like, and it's going to be the mirror of them. And this is what's happening. Now, I don't think that the white identitarians and the alt-right are as dangerous. I don't think they're as powerful. I don't find them to be as much of a threat. And there's a number of reasons for that. But for Salon to pretend as though all of a sudden now we need to do something. Oh, you know what? This identity politics thing is kind of a shitty... Maybe we shouldn't have done that. Yeah, it's a little too late for this, guys. This is your fault. This is the reason why we're in this mess, is because the groups like this have basically divided everyone to the point where this is their only recourse. Otherwise, because like, look, all right, let's go with the most extreme examples of the alt-right. Let's go with the actual neo-Nazis and KKK guys, okay? Because the alt-right is a mixed bag of lots of shit that I'm not saying I don't understand. I get it, but it's all over the place, and it's really difficult to pinpoint. And by the way, the leftist media is not helping because they're basically just lumping everybody in there anyway. So they don't even have like a good concept of what the alt-right actually is because they're just labeling everyone. But even if we look at the most extreme examples on the alt-right, the actual Ku Klux Klan and the actual neo-Nazis, okay? Not even the white nationalists, but just these guys. They have always been around. Like, for as long as there have been Nazis, we've had them. Okay? And the KKK. They've been around since the KKK started. But for most of the 20th century, or I would say, maybe not most, the latter half of the 20th century up until really recently, the KKK was treated like a joke. Because they are a joke. They're like, what, a couple thousand members. Certainly, you know, you don't want to, like, end up in their part of the fucking Appalachian at the wrong time of the night. But for the most part, they had no power, and nobody respected them, and nobody gave a shit about them. But they existed. But what's happening now, what the media has done, and this attitude, this call-out culture, this, like, liberal elitism, all this bullshit, the Antifa attacks, the election, and all of the feminisms and all of that has essentially emboldened these people to come back out, and now we have to fucking deal with them again. And I still don't consider them to be a threat, but the more that the mainstream doubles down on this crap, the more power they give to them. And I think that currently the difference is massive. But I think that there's certainly something to be cautious about. And for them to suddenly now decide that they have to fight Nazis and the way to do it is to stop talking about identity politics, that's bullshit. Because that means that, well, I don't know about this guy. Like this guy, Anish Shivani, he never liked the idea of identity politics. But I think that at an editorial level, Salon looked at his article, and they probably would have said no to this thing like 2 years ago, but today, or when this was released, which was a couple days ago, they said, no, this is good, because maybe now we should start addressing it. So I'm not talking specifically to the author, but more like the attitude around the article, because it would seem that they now find that this is relevant and necessary to publish, so they went ahead and did it. So, in light of that, I say, if Salon actually cared and they actually believed that identity politics was not the way forward, which it never was, then you wouldn't be able to go to their website and find still a ton of articles related to identity politics because they're still doing it and they're still talking about it. And I would guess that as soon as things seem like they're going back to normal again, which I don't know what normal looks like to Salon, maybe if they elect whoever, the U.S. gets the president they want, or not the U.S., but Salon gets the president they want. They're going to continue to use identity politics. It's just a matter of like what's useful to them and what's not. It's the old saying, there's no such thing as bad tactics, only bad targets.
Yeah, I wanted to point out another nugget of truth in this. This is for Salon to publish this. They have to. So you got Salon in the past. They've used the assertion that even entertaining ideas like this makes you a racist to shut people down for saying that identity politics is unproductive and damaging. Okay, so for them to come out then and have an article written by somebody that says identity politics are unproductive and damaging to the progressive agenda, and to entertain the idea that this guy that this guy might be, right about the idea that the progressive agenda could go forward without identity politics and be just fine. This is an admission that the thing that identity politics is supposed to be about, right? It's supposed to be about ending racism. It's supposed to be about ending sexism. It's supposed to be about ending all these types of prejudice. It's supposed to be opposition to existing oppression. But obviously, the progressive agenda is not about those things. All of the statements in the past, everything they have ever said about, well, you're a racist if you're not for affirmative action, you're a sexist if you don't think that we need to interfere with employer-employee relationships to make sure that men and women are getting paid the same thing for the same position, regardless of whether the woman takes time off to have a baby or not. All of that was fake. None of it was meant. It was all just a ruse in order to obtain more government power, in order to allow progressive interests to infiltrate these areas of control, to basically be able to say, well, no, we get to tell you what to pay your employees. No, we get to tell you who you can and can't hire, and we get to decide who can and can't get a job. That's all it was about. That's all it was ever about. Because if it was really what was necessary to end racism, if it was really that this identity politics, this victim politics narrative that they have been pursuing for the last 30 years, if that was real, if that the end goal of that really was to end racism, and they really believed that that was what it was going to take to get rid of bigotry and prejudices, nobody in their community would be allowed to speak up and say, we're doing ourselves damage by putting this forth. They would be silenced immediately and shamed out of progressive politics. That right there is Salon's admission that it is all fake. They don't mean any of it. They're just using it to manipulate people into listening to them, to shut down opposition, and to create inroads for themselves into positions of authority where they will have more control over the individual. That's it.
All right. Anybody else got any comments on this?
Well, it's worth remembering that the very term identity politics was popularized by the alternative media fairly recently. The approach itself, the sort of framework itself of identity politics is as old as the hills, but the people who use it sort of don't call it anything because that's how it works. It's not about identifying itself; it's about identifying people. So it has no mechanism for self-correction or self-awareness. So I think it was around about the time of sort of the height of Gamergate. I think where people really started looking into what these academics believe. And over the course of 3 years now, we've been slowly sort of naming the problem, which is very much their approach. I mean, that's part of identity politics. They understand the name the problem approach, and we finally got around to naming the problem that they have. And now, 3 or 4 years into this debacle, they're finally going, damn it, we're doing a thing, and they've found a name for the thing we're doing that's wrong.
Yeah.
And it all involves names. Oh, layers. My head hurts.
It's so much fun being ahead of the game. Oh wait, no, it's not. When it comes to identity politics.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, but you're right, Mike.
You get hipster points, but
Yeah, aside from which just makes you more of a douchebag.
yeah, you can't buy beer with those in heaven, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
But Jesus knows that this isn't fake news. So let's go on to the next story then. All right, the American
What
College.
would Jesus read?
What would Jesus read? Probably this one. I don't know. The American College for Pediatricians says facts, not ideology, determine reality. In a position statement published by the American College of Pediatricians website, 8 points are laid out in opposition to gender ideology. The following are not in full context for time. If you want to read it all, we have included a link, acpeds.org. So here's what they say. This is basically about the whole socialized, gender, non-binary, raising your kids that way. You know, when you see situations where parents try to raise their kid gender neutral, or they encourage them to get a transition, or to dress like a girl instead of a boy, or be somewhere in between, or whatever it is. This is what the American College of Pediatricians has to say about it. So they say, 1, human sexuality is an objective biological binary trait. XY and XX are genetic markers of male and female, respectively, not genetic markers of a disorder. 2, no one is born with a gender. Everyone is born with a biological sex. 3, a person's belief that he or she is something they are not is at best a sign of confused thinking. 4, puberty is not a disease, and puberty-blocking hormones can be dangerous. They need to make these statements because there are people who believe these things to be true. That puberty is a disease, and that people can believe that they are something they are not, no matter how young they are, and that people are born with a gender that is not their sex. According to the DSM-5, as many as 98% of gender-confused boys and 88% of gender-confused girls eventually accept their biological sex after naturally passing through puberty. This is like normal, okay? Number 6, I'm going to say pubescent. Prepubescent children diagnosed with gender dysphoria may be given puberty blockers as young as 11 and will require cross-sex hormones in later adolescence to continue impersonating the opposite sex. These children will never be able to conceive any genetically related children, even via artificial reproductive technology. In addition, cross-sex hormones such as testosterone and estrogen are associated with dangerous health risks, including, but not limited to, cardiac disease, high blood pressure, blood clots, stroke, diabetes, and cancer. Number 7. Rates of suicide are nearly 20 times greater amongst adults who use cross-sex hormones and undergo sex reassignment surgery, even in Sweden, which is amongst the most LGBTQ-affirming countries. So this, again, these are just facts. That's all it is. Number 8, last one. Conditioning children into believing a lifetime of chemical and surgical impersonation of the opposite sex is normal and healthful Conditioning children into believing a lifetime of chemical and surgical impersonation of the opposite sex and is normal and healthful is child abuse. And let me expand on that. Endorsing gender discordance as normal via public education and legal policy will confuse children and parents, leading more children to present to gender clinics where they will be given puberty-blocking drugs. This, in turn, virtually ensures that they will choose a lifetime of carcinogenic and otherwise toxic cross-sex hormones and likely consider unnecessary surgical mutilation of their body parts as young adults. So it's considered child abuse.
All right, so low-key, I kind of got a semi listening to Brian read that out. Not because of like the suicide stuff, which is obviously terrible, but just because, hearing so much logic just coming out of the American College of Pediatricians, it's just like I can hear the music from the heavens descending upon me. I feel we've had so much good news.
Yeah. Well,
today.
there's some good news today, and I'm glad that...
It's about time they were logical.
Yeah.
But
go ahead, Hannah.
I got to point out, this is not a condemnation of adults who transition after making the decision as adults to transition, or even after making the decision as adolescents to transition. This is a condemnation of adults who impose the decision to transition on prepubescent children. And there is a significant difference. At 5 years old, at 6 years old, kids don't have the wherewithal, they don't have the logic to be trusted to decide to have dinner before they eat their ice cream. You can't trust them to make that kind of decisions for themselves. If they're sick and they have a medicine they have to take to get better and it tastes nasty, you have to fight with the child to get them to take the medicine. You have to assert authority over the child to get them to take the medicine. Kids have to have an authority asserted over them to get them to go to school and to engage in healthy behaviors normally, eat their vegetables, things like that, to avoid engaging in unhealthy behaviors like staying up all night and so on. So these are things you can't just say, but this one really big decision, this one life-changing, potentially dangerous decision, they have the capacity to make that decision. Just not all these, they might not know the difference between real and pretend in terms of things like Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy, but it's okay to trust them to know the difference between real and pretend in terms of gender dysphoria, which is a real and compelling disorder. It's as real as obsessive compulsive disorder. It's as real as body dysmorphic disorder. It's as real as schizophrenia. And how it gets addressed is up to the doctor and the patient as adults. The treatment for a child is not going to be the same. You don't give kids the same drugs that you would give adults in the same amounts that you would give to adults to treat other disorders. It's dangerous to do that too. And you don't necessarily do the same thing in this terms either. And while I would say that it is wrong to force a viewpoint on anyone that is suffering from gender dysmorphic disorder, you really can't, you can't expect them to just change on their own any more than you could expect to pray the gay away. It's also wrong to look at a 5 or 6 year old child and say, well, they've made up their mind for the rest of their life. They know what they want and what they want to do and who they are, and they're not going to develop any further from this point in any different direction than the one that they're going now. Because that's bullshit. We know better. And politics is no excuse to forget that.
Yep. I'd like to also add bottom line from the page itself, just so that this is also clarified, because I'm going to echo Hannah's sentiments. I'm sure that Max and Mike are in the same boat, where this is not a condemnation of adults that are transitioning and they genuinely are going through that. This is basically for parents that are trying to push this on their kids, or for academics that are trying to push that on their kids, because that happens too. It's basically for the people who think they can fuck with children that should not be dealing with this stuff at their age at all. And if anything, they need to come to those conclusions on their own, in their own time, in their own way. And if they have parents that love them and are involved with them, then things will work out for them. Okay. So bottom line from the website, our opponents advocate a new scientifically baseless standard of care for children with a psychological condition that would otherwise resolve after puberty for the vast majority of patients concerned. So they're talking about gender dysphoria here. So what they said earlier is that 80 to 90-something% of boys and girls that appear to be confused about their gender, when they hit puberty, they're fine. That's basically how it works out. So we're looking at a very small percentage of people that actually, remain confused. Specifically, they advise this: affirmation of children's thoughts, which are contrary to physical reality, the chemical castration of these children prior to puberty with GnRH agonists, puberty blockers that cause infertility, stunted growth, low bone density, and an unknown impact on their brain development. And finally, the permanent sterilization of those children prior to age 18 via cross-sex hormones. There is an obvious self-fulfilling nature to encouraging young gender dysphoric children to impersonate the opposite sex and then institute pubertal suppression. If a boy who questions whether or not he is a boy who is meant to grow into a man is treated as though he is a girl, then has his natural pubertal progression to manhood suppressed, have we not set in motion an inevitable outcome? All of his same-sex peers develop into young men, his opposite-sex friends develop into young women, but he remains a pre-pubertal boy. He will be left psychosocially isolated and alone. He will be left with the psychological impression that he sometimes is wrong. He will be less able to identify with his same-sex peers and being male, and thus will be more likely to self-identify as non-male or female. Moreover, neuroscience reveals that the prefrontal cortex of the brain, which is responsible for judgment and risk assessment, is not mature until the mid-20s. Never has it been more scientifically clear that children and adolescents are incapable of making informed decisions regarding permanent, irreversible, and life-altering medical interventions. For this reason, the college maintains it is abusive to promote this ideology, first and foremost for the well-being of the gender dysphoric children themselves, and secondly, for all their non-gender discordant peers, many of whom will subsequently question their own gender identity and face violations of their right to bodily privacy and safety. This also, as an aside, makes me think, because they talk about how they mention that the same-sex peers may be more likely to identify as non-male or female, and they may become confused about their own sexuality. I think this might be one of the reasons why a lot of these sort of, I'm not going to call them trans activists, because I don't think that's what it is. They're basically just gender activists, genderless advocates maybe. They push for this idea that there is no such thing because they want to make the people who are confused by this to feel comfortable, and them feeling comfortable in their confusion seems to be more important than actually solving the problem or doing things the right way, which is what the American College of Pediatricians is essentially requesting. So this is basically fields over reals, is what I'm saying.
I just want to remind everybody that it's illegal to tattoo your children. You cannot take your child downtown to a tattoo artist, and like I always thought, I can't comfortably wear jewelry. I'm not going to go into why, but I don't wear, like, you won't usually see me with a necklace or a bracelet or anything like that. And I always thought, well, I got penicillin allergy. What if I get a penicillin allergy tattooed where the bracelet would show? If I had a bracelet on? Couldn't do that as a kid. My parents couldn't even consent to me doing that as a kid. It's illegal to tattoo children. You'd have to actually go to court and get a judge's approval to do something like that. So here they're talking about, and like a tattoo can be removed. There's laser processes for it and so on. And here they're talking about something that is obviously far more complex and life-changing than a tattoo. I mean, what we read here in the article, the cross-sex hormones are associated with cardiac disease. The biggest killer, the biggest cause of early death in the United States is cardiac disease. And here we have people talking about imposing on children a course of medical dosage of chemicals that will increase their risk of cardiac disease. Why would you do that to them? And especially given you can't get a tattoo for your child. If your child wanted a tattoo, strongly identified with something, thought it meant the world to him, you still couldn't tattoo your child. But you can change their gender, you can change their sex to match a gender that you think that they are. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's a good point, the tattoo thing. And yet, for some reason, this is something that we have to discuss. We have to talk about it. So, but good on you, American College of Pediatricians, rather, for bringing this up. Let's hope that, if it turns out that they're wrong and there's more data, hey, bring it forward. I want to see the best arguments. At the end of the day, that's what I want to see. But right now, these guys are making the best case, and they seem to also be the most credible. So there you go. Problem solved. Take that, Lacey Green, Liana K. All right, so moving on to...
eat your heart out, Riley Dennis.
Yeah. Moving on to the last story. Professor finds majority of minorities do not actually face discrimination. God, I like how these obvious stories that we're basically reading, but it's got to be done, right? A new study conducted by a group of university professors found that most Americans actually report experiencing very little discrimination. The study, led by Professor Brian Boutwell, consisted of review response data from a survey of more than 14,000 Americans, finding that the vast majority claim to have never or rarely been a victim of discrimination. The results, relatively consistent across racial lines, found that only 25% of Americans responded yes to ever experiencing discrimination. For the entire sample, about 25% claimed that they had felt discriminated against. It was lower than what we might have thought going into it, Boutwell told Campus Reform. Although racial minorities did comparatively report facing more discrimination, racial disparities were not nearly as high as expected, with only 31% of blacks reporting often experiencing discrimination, sometimes or often. Similarly, just 27% of Hispanics responded similarly, followed by 23% of whites and 18% of Asians, according to the study. So apparently Asians are the least discriminated against group of people in a white-dominated country. While the findings suggest that discrimination is less prevalent than predicted, Boutwell cautioned against too much optimism. People have rightly pointed out that 25% of the population is a lot of people, Boutwell told Campus Reform. That's still millions of people. That's far higher than what we'd like to see. Ideally, you want that number increasing towards the mythical 0 point. He went on to say that we always want to be striving for a lower percentage of folks that feel discriminated against. But even so, when you have 3/4 of the sample saying no, that's an interesting finding, and that was true across racial and ethnic groups. Since respondents were asked about discrimination in general, as opposed to exclusively racial discrimination, the survey captured a wide variety of discrimination experiences. Notably, when asked about what they think caused unfair treatment, most respondents issued race as a motivating factor. Rather, most instead chalked up to their discriminatory experiences to other causes, such as personal appearance or political views, Boutwell explained. Well, that's super interesting. Such findings, Boutwell elaborated, are both interesting and problematic, saying that while he can't speculate, discrimination on the grounds of political views may be on the rise. You don't fucking say. If anyone feels that their political alignment creates blowback for them in everyday life, that's one possibility, he said, noting that it's a reasonable one given the data on political polarization. Boutwell concluded by cautioning against using his findings as definitive, saying it's not a perfect measure of discrimination and more research needs to be done. Now, before I give this to you guys, I do want to point out this is only 14,000 people, and I think the majority of the ones that were, they were all students. So you're looking at a specific age group. Also, the race factor was not the case in most of these examples. People said it was basically like they felt discriminated against based on their appearance or perhaps on other factors. For example, their political views, or there could be other things too. For example, women may, have chalked it up to their gender. Another thing that's also important to point out is how do we define discrimination? Because what's being asked in the survey is, have you ever felt discriminated against? which means you can't really prove whether you were or not. You basically just ask people if they felt they were discriminated against. And if you have a group of people that have a tendency, well, I wouldn't say a tendency, but if you have a group of people that are told that they should take offense as often as possible for specific reasons, they may find offense where none exists. For example, you might tell a trans person, if you're a trans activist, that they can expect all kinds of discrimination based on the fact that they're trans at all times, no matter what. So even in genuine cases where they're being discriminated against because they're trans, those might be legitimate, but there might be other cases, like they go to a restaurant and the guy's like, I'm sorry, we don't have any tables, but they see that there's an empty one, but they don't know that it's reserved. They might say, oh, it's because I'm trans. So it's also important that there's a lot here that's either unknown or wasn't accounted for, or just the way that the study was conducted based on what you might know about other people. So, but this is what we have right now, despite all that. So if you guys wanted to chime in or anything.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Like 300 million people in the U.S. and only 14,000, obviously, that's not at all anywhere close to an appropriate measure. But given my perspective on the way race relations have been, especially for the last few years, I would have expected the number to be a whole lot higher, like past 50%.
Especially amongst college students, which I'm also surprised by, yeah, for sure.
But 75%? That's crazy. That's crazy good, in my opinion, just like based on what my presuppositions were and hearing that.
There is one other factor to consider. Now, I don't know how many different colleges they did all over the country or where the concentrations were, but I would also make the argument that for most of the United States, most of it, there really isn't much in the way of racial tension at all. And I think that the only places where it's being sort of created are the areas that you see the media reporting on, and also areas where there are large concentrations of people that are vastly different culturally that have to kind of like try to coexist. I think that's where you get the most problems, but even then most people find a way to get along. Like where I live here. Oh, go ahead, Hannah.
I was going to say, I think where you really get the most problems in terms of people believing themselves to be discriminated against and people engaging in, growing racial tension related conflicts with each other. I think that probably happens more in areas where the belief is prevalent that prejudice in the United States or any other area is still a pervasive, huge problem. And what we saw here with this, only 25% responded affirmatively to ever experiencing discrimination. I will bet if they asked all those people if they thought that their experience indicated that discrimination and prejudice that lead to discrimination were reducing in America, they would say, oh no, they probably would say that it was happening to other people and just they hadn't experienced it personally. This is something that I've seen with a lot of identity politics ideologues on social networking sites, on discussion forums and stuff like that, where they'll make arguments promoting identity politics. And then when you say, well, no, when I say I'm female and I haven't experienced the things you're talking about, well, it's happening to other women. Well, can you tell me your experience? Well, no, it's happening to these other women. And it's prevalent and it's pervasive because somebody is experiencing it and somebody has talked about it, and therefore it's happening all over the place. Even though I haven't experienced it or you haven't experienced it, that doesn't mean that it's not prevalent. And that's the argument that I get all the time. So I think we still have this perception because we have, like you've said, activists telling people, if you're white, you're gonna, you're prejudiced. If you're black, you're gonna be experiencing these things. And if they buy into identity politics at all, they're going to be seeing it everywhere. Oh, I made this mistake because I have a prejudice inside me. Oh, I experienced this mistake at this person's hand because they're prejudiced against me. And I've seen that in my personal life. I've seen that in my work life. I've had people respond to me as a retail worker and a job where I am required to approach customers and ask if I can assist them, that they've responded to my doing that as if I only did it because I suspect them of shoplifting because they're black, or I only did it because I think they're not smart enough to find things on their own because they're female.
Yeah.
And, this is the kind of thing that perception isn't reality, but in terms of survey-based, subjective, opinion-dependent research, perception determines the outcome of the research. So it's very difficult to look at research like this and say, well, it's indicative of something. We can call this proof of something. The only thing we can call this proof of is that apparently there's not enough incidents happening to people of that age group where on a large scale where they think that they personally are experiencing racism or sexism.
Basically,
that's
they're not proving. Yeah, they're not proving enough people are getting offended to their satisfaction. Now, I mean, the professor or the people who conducted the study said they were surprised, which means that they had expected a different outcome, and they were expecting something much higher, especially amongst minorities. And the thing is that they did not get the result that they were expecting to. And I mean, bully on them for not trying to alter the data, but I think that a lot of stuff was in their favor in terms of making sure that it came out in a skewed way. Because if you think about it, if basically the burden of proof of whether or not someone is discriminated against is simply whether or not they felt discriminated against, and you ask a bunch of college students that have essentially gone through, or are going through the college system, then you are more likely to get a higher result. So this 25% number that they are getting is probably way skewed in the positive compared to the average American, because they're also more keyed into, take offense and to sort of complain about it. And also because you broadened what offense is. So for example, they said race was not something that came up as the reason, but they also said more blacks were affected and less Asians were affected. Well, why are they the smallest group that feels discriminated against? There might be something cultural to it. Maybe there's something about Asian culture that's you move on. You basically, that guy was kind of shitty to me, whatever, fuck it, I'm going to keep going, right? Whereas maybe in black culture, it's more encouraged to take offense. And maybe it's not because of race, but who knows? That's what I'm getting at is that when you look at the tool they use to measure whether or not someone has been discriminated against, which is basically based on whether or not the person felt discriminated against, then you go ahead, Max. What was that?
Can I just offer a quick hypothesis in respect to the Asian thing?
Yeah.
Weebs.
Yeah,
that's all.
Well, yeah. When you take into account first, that you're discriminated against if you feel that way. Second, we're not going to ask whether this is race specific, but we are still going to divide people up by race and determine what their score was, which is kind of odd. And we're also going to leave how they were discriminated or for what the reason is wide open. So it could be race, but it may not be. But it also could be your sexual preference. It could be your your gender, whether you're male or female. It could be the way you look, like if you're covered in tattoos or whatever, or it could be your political views. And the political view thing was the thing that they did not expect that actually makes the most sense. This is actually the thing that's actually the most interesting, for me anyway, that I think that actually there's something definitely there, because what it means is that people tend to judge each other by their ideas rather than what they look like. But going back to what I was saying before is the way that the study seems to have been constructed, there was probably an expectation that there would be a different result. And I think that there was this is just speculation, I know I don't have any evidence of this, there may have been some bias going in when the test was constructed. A foregone conclusion, I'll put it that way. Or at least
something
a presumption.
They were looking for.
Yeah, not that there was anything insidious, but they were basically like, you know what, I bet there's still a lot of racism in this country. Let's find out if we can measure it. And they didn't really think about whether or not that may not be as true in general, and maybe things are not as bad as they think. And so, that's what I would guess.
I want to point a couple of other things out. One of them, you said this was what, 14,000 respondents?
Yeah, 14,000.
If I remember correctly, that's a larger group than one gender or the other of respondents in the National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey total. And when they break it down into straight, gay, and bisexual, it becomes even smaller groups. So, and they were able to get assumptions about the general public out of that size of sample. So 14,000 is not really that small of a sample. There, in fact, the sample from the NISVS for bisexuals, I think it was, for bisexuals of each sex, was less than 200, if I remember correctly. I don't have the numbers in front of me, so I may be talking out of my ass here. I know it was small like that, though. It was very small. The number, not my ass. But anyway, that's the first thing. The second thing is, I want to point out, perception again is not reality. Well, this survey might have defined their definition of discrimination, as in you face discrimination, might have been defined in terms of what the respondent felt had happened. But in reality, discrimination isn't defined that way. You are not discriminated against just because you felt discriminated against. You're discriminated against if you got treated differently because of your demographic than you would have been treated had you been part of another demographic. So if the reason you didn't get hired was because of your skin color or your sex and not because of your resume or the way you presented yourself or so on, that's discrimination. If the reason you didn't get hired was because you came in smelling like a sewer and you hadn't bathed in 3 weeks, that's not discrimination, especially if you're working with the public in that job. And if you have a particular demographic that gets discriminated against and you ignore that factor and you presume the reason you didn't get hired was because of your demographic, you feel discriminated against, but it doesn't mean that you were. And what this study really measures is people's perception, whether they were discriminated or not. It doesn't measure whether they actually were. It measures whether they think of situations that they've experienced as indicating that they experienced discrimination.
Exactly. I think a good example of that is, my perceptions of discrimination towards me on the basis of the fact that I'm yellow. Like, obviously, I think that, everybody should treat that equally to any other type of racial discrimination, but obviously some people don't for some reason, Brian. But anyways, just to address Hannah's other claim regarding the NISVS, I just want to say that their sample size...
Look, Max, I just have a thing against mustard, okay? I can't help it. When I look at you, I just think of mustard. I have a thing against it.
Have you ever tried it? Just take a sip. Just like a little spoonful, okay?
Look, if it's not Dijon, I'm not interested. And I'm sorry, but you're just too bright yellow for me. Okay.
Address, and yes, I did. I speak the truth. All Simpsons can do, that's street knowledge. The NISVS, their sample size was 16,507, so about the same.
Okay, so yeah, but that was the total, wasn't it? Both sexes together.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I thought. And approximately half of that. They sampled. They interviewed more women than men. But approximately half of that, a little more than half was women, a little less than half was men.
Yes.
So, and that's what I said. Each sex, individually, that was larger than the sample size of each sex individually. So the whole NISVS with both sexes together only had 2,000 more people than that. So it's not a real small sample.
All right. Okay, well, if there's nothing else, I guess we're going to wrap it up. We're done. We did all the stories. And in an hour and a half.
I just want to emphasize the fact that we've had some really good stories, guys, and we should feed off of that positivity. First, we got that awesome statement from the College of Pediatrics. We got this example, you know, the fact that there seems to be less racism than any, well, at least for myself, might have anticipated.
Yeah.
And also, Salon took a step in the right direction. I mean, it's just a step, but hey, it's something.
Well, now I'm about to bring you some serious cancer. So we're going to be going into the after show, where we're going to be looking at one of the worst things white people ever did to black people this week. And I think I'm actually going to have to sit down and watch this fucking music video, just because I want to know exactly what we're dealing with here. But I will be reading this for the patrons, and I have, even though I've been through this is week 5 of chemotherapy, and I have not thrown up yet, I have a feeling that I'm going to break my record after watching this video, to be quite honest. I think this will be the thing that cleanses my innards. So, well, I guess we'll see how that goes, but I want to thank Max and Hannah and Mike for joining me on the Polecat Cast today and going through all of this torturous shit with me. Although this week wasn't bad. This story is going to be pretty bad, though. And I want to thank you guys who are watching us on multiple streaming platforms: Facebook, Twitch, Periscope, Ustream, Livestream, 2 YouTube channels, and God knows where the fuck else. So thank you guys for joining us on the live stream. And yes, we'll talk to you guys very soon. If you want to join us, of course, you know what to do. What is it? Patreon.com? Yeah. Patreon.com/honeybadgerradio. Become a patron. Join us in the after show. It's time to go.